So are you a person that likes plants with big leaves and possibly something hidden underneath? If so, stick with me and let's have a look at a very interesting philodendron. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me and in front of me today. It's tropical houseplants. So it's going to be a continuation of the plant review series, mainly because happy birthday to the plant that's right next to me. It is just over a year old now, and this is the Philodendron Serpens. And like most of these review series, I will add the kind of rules for the people that are just joining for the first time, but essentially it's a place where I like to give you my overall thoughts about a plant that I've owned for X amount of years, how it's been to grow, what challenges I might have faced, and then I'll give you the score of how I feel this plant has done in my collection or in my house. But yes, you might be able to see the plant that we're going to be talking about today. It is the Philodendron Serpens. It is quite large, but I will show you that in just a second. There are some challenges that I've experienced with this plant, again, which we'll go to it in a bit more detail. But in essence, this is the one plant that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of, but I kind of think they should. Let's have a look at things. So coming into the background for this plant, and now I will lift it up to show you the sheer size of this plant. I'm trying to knock it on the fan, and janky support sticks for the win with this one. But let me put it down because it is quite heavy. But that gave you a bit of an idea of kind of scope with this plant, and I'm trying to get it so that we are both in the scene. Let me just shift it around ever so slightly. There we go. So for the people that have been around for a while, I did an unboxing. Did I do an unboxing? I don't know if I did actually. When I was doing the plant panel, and this is the background obviously of how this plant came into my care, but when I was doing the plant panel at the Leeds Plant Festival, Rare Plant Festival, I'll kind of link it at the top. I have done a video. And one of the plants that I bought whilst I was there from Grow Tropicals was a very small kind of rooted cutting of Philodendron Serpens, mainly because I wanted it. And it is because of the fuzzy petioles. Let me see if I can bring it up a bit closer so you might be able to see if I bring it in. And I'll try to hide my face, so hopefully you are seeing the sheer size of those furry petioles, basically. So let me just put it down. Oh, this is going to be fun today. I'm going to try not to lift it up too much because space, I ain't got none in this small conservatory. Not that small, but small for the volume of plants that I've got. So yes, I got this plant past the point of getting the small propagation or the rooted cutting from Grow Tropicals, and there was a reason behind that. And again, this is why I was saying the people that have been here for a while, they've probably heard part of this story. So I don't think I've got a picture, because the only pictures that I take of plants when they first come into my care are the ones that I put into my plant care app, and unfortunately when they perish, spoiler, is the time where I delete it off my app. Otherwise I've just had too much clutter on there. But so the original pictures of the original plant unfortunately got deleted. But this is a plant that I decided, and this was actually one of the main reasons why I did my first Ecuagenera order. And it was because I wanted this plant back in my collection. I finally got my hands on one and I'm just like, yes, this is awesome. And then it just didn't do very well. I will say it wasn't Grow Tropical's fault. So I spoke to Jacob when I got it, and they did actually tell me, look, this is freshly rooting, basically. And I think I stressed it out too much. I will also give you a bit of an indication of how this plant takes stress. And yeah, it just didn't do very well, and it kind of died a death relatively quickly. So when that did happen, I kind of went and I just went, you know what, I'm going to do an order with Ecuagenera for the first time, multiple orders later. But yeah, that was the first, this was part of the original order, the first order that I ever did from Ecuagenera. And part of it is that I wanted to see how I was going to do. There was some drama with the delivery dates and it coming in at a specific time, which was considerably delayed, but it was to do with customs and Brexit. And bit of a spoiler and a bit of an update. They have recently had, I'm filming this just after kind of Black Friday sales, they had some really good sales. And I was going to be really good. And I'm just like, I'm not going to buy anything, but I'm going to go and have a quick look. I don't know who I was lying to. I did an order. And they were very good. They came back to me. They kind of updated. Their comms has got a lot better since that first video because their communication back then wasn't great. But their comms has been a lot better. And they were kind of saying, look, we are planning to deliver your order in the next delivery that we're going to be doing, which is going to be the end of January. Now, the end of January, I'm going back home to Greece for a couple of weeks. So I was sitting there going, oh no, I really don't want to be cutting it fine because they couldn't give me a date yet. I'm just, I don't want to be cutting it fine. Get the order coming to me either just before I go away and I don't have enough time to kind of like establish it before I then get friends to kind of take care of my plants whilst I'm away. Or even worse, it arrives when I'm not here and I'm going to have to explain everything to them. So I did go back to them and just kind of said, look, can I potentially, this is a situation, I wasn't aware that it was going to be quite so much later than when I ordered it. Is there any chance I can push it back even further? And if you've got a delivery that's happening in February, and they did confirm that they've got a delivery that's happening at the end of February, and they would be more than happy. They understand the situation. They'd be more than happy to do that, which I think was great. And to be fair, most plant stores will be the same. If you tell them there's a situation and they might need to hold your plants back for you, they usually would. For the reality of all this, part of the reason why I placed the order, barring the fact that I wanted those plants, is I wanted to see how they're going to ship in the middle of the winter. And actually, arguably, the end of October, the end of January isn't as cold as the end of February. Anybody who lives in the UK, they know what I'm talking about. February usually skins us alive in terms of cold. So I want to see what's going to happen. Sorry. Massive tangent. Hopefully I'll label it at the very beginning of my little rant and you can skip if you wanted to. But yes, this was a plant that I got because of the other one that perished. And it had an interesting journey when it arrived to me because it didn't have the best root system. I will see if I can add a picture here. I'll see if I can add some pictures or videos of when I did the first unboxing, when I did this unboxing basically, just so you can see the situation that it was in. So I had a bit of rehabbing to do. But that's all I think I want to say about background right now. Let's dive into the next topic. So coming into speed of growth with this one. So I will say I have lost a few leaves along the way. And the reality with this, and it was a tricky one because it was struggling as much as it was. It wasn't on the brink of death, if that makes sense. So I had to rehab this plant slightly, but I wasn't rehabbing down from like nothing. So it still kept all of its leaves. I babied it like nobody's business, mainly because I knew how sensitive the other one that I had got was. And yeah, it did take a long time to get going. So pretty much wasted most of the winter months of it just kind of trying to establish itself. When the summer arrived, however, and again, I'll benchmark this against like something like a golden pothos in here. If a golden pothos in here will bring out 2 to 3 new leaves on each stem each month in the growing period, so the summer, this one brought out about a leaf each month, roughly, maybe a leaf every month and a half. So, but I will say again, this was a plant that is relatively mature at this point in terms of leaf size. I mean, I'll do a head test just so you've got an understanding of quite how large that leaf is. And the older leaves were smaller. I'll see if I can pull one. You won't be able to see. I'll show you that one in a minute because we'll talk about pests. But yeah, it is one of the plants that is relatively fast for a philodendron, not massively so, and it is big. So this is my challenge sometimes when I talk about any plant really, when it's relatively mature and it's bringing out sizable leaves every time it now brings out a new leaf. If it takes a bit longer, I don't want to give you a false idea that this plant might be slow. It might just be slow because, at least in my experience, I found the bigger the plant gets, the bigger the leaves are, the longer they take to kind of come up and emerge and harden off. So take this with a pinch of salt, but I'd be really curious if any of you have got a smaller, kind of more juvenile form of this plant. How do you find the speed? Let us all know in the comments down below. But yeah, overall, not a bad plant in terms of speed. Now coming into ease of propagation, and I haven't propagated this just yet, but I can talk about it from the point of my experience from the first propagation, the one that I got from Grow Tropicals, and then also rehabbing this plant a bit more. So relatively straightforward. You would still take a cutting from a node. There is good aerial rootage on this one, I will say. Let me see if I can lift it up. I said I wasn't going to lift this up, but I'm going to have to throughout the video, I think. Let me see if I can bring it in so you might be able to see. I don't know. I'm really sorry how dark it is at the moment. I've got all the lights on me, but welcome to the UK in the winter. You might be able to see, if I hide my face, some roots that are happening there on the node. And it is quite good. I mean, the nodes and the stem, I will say, are very similar. If you've ever grown a verrucosum, it is very, very similar. Now, I'm curious. I haven't ever done any kind of full-on research with this one, and I know I should watch my other videos as to why we all need to be doing some more research. This might be closely related to the verrucosum, whether or not it is a naturally occurring hybrid of the verrucosum or something that was the verrucosum naturally being pollinated into something else and it hybridized itself, and then created something entirely new. I don't know, but there's a lot of very similar structures. The growing stem gets a tiny bit of corking, and corking I cover in another video that I will link at the top there. Similar to what the verrucosum stem will do, especially when it's more mature. So yeah, it is one that, at least when it comes to the propagation, very similar to the Philodendron verrucosum again, and certain other philodendrons. It's kind of eluding me at the moment, but this, at least in my experience, has got relatively fine roots, especially considering for how large the plant is. So there is that to remember. And when I first got it from Grow Tropicals, that initial cutting, it only had like 3 or 4 rootlets, and they're so thin. And it was in damp sphagnum moss, and I should have kept it in damp sphagnum moss until it established itself a bit more. But I didn't, and that was my bad. That was, as I said, it was nothing to do with Grow Tropicals. It was me messing up that plant, really. So when people tell you don't repot it for a few weeks, listen to them. I very rarely do, but at the same time, if I lose a plant because of my own pigheadedness, I lose a plant because of my own pigheadedness. It's nobody else's fault. And I do that knowing the risk, so it's fine. The reality is, at least in my experience, 9 times out of 10, it doesn't really have too much of an issue, but it does show you the true colors of the plant, I found, if it's that sensitive, basically. So tried moving that into pond, didn't like it, but I think it was just because it was just not rooted in enough. I probably kept it maybe a bit too wet for too long. So I wanted to try again. So that didn't do too well, and it didn't take to many kind of corrective methods either. So I've tried to remove it, tried to cut off the rotting. It might just been because it didn't have enough roots. Tried putting it in a propagation box. None of these things worked before I then decided to get a more established, larger plant. Thinking even then, when I was ordering this from Ecuagenera, knowing how sensitive my first one was, I'm just like, this is going to be a plant. And I've heard stories, and I've now experienced that a lot of philodendrons, especially the fine-rooted ones, do not ship as well. coming in from kind of Ecuador because, unfortunately, again, Brexit, we've got the European Ecuador right next to us, but they don't ship to us. We need to get them all the way from Ecuador. Such fun. But yeah, this is one that I knew wasn't going to do particularly well. So I was kind of expecting to have to do some rehab. It wasn't too bad, but it did take a while to root out. So based on that and based on my experience, and I rooted it out in pond. I don't know if you saw when I was moving it up, and actually it's not pond specifically, it's Soil Ninja's coarse semi-hydro mix. So it's the chunkier kind of pebbles. This one took months and it was getting decent light, but it took months. It might have been the growing media that I had it in, and it was also the fact that I was trying to keep it more on the dry side rather than the wet side until it really established itself into that growing media. Because the roots are so fine, a lot of the times you would go for smaller pond, basically, or the kind of the fine semi-hydro mix, for instance, from Soil Ninja. Sometimes I found, at least in my experience, plants that have got finer roots, thinner roots, generally will do better in those smaller pebbles. However, if I also know that that plant is particularly fussy with how much water stays on it, for how long as well, and it has a tendency to rot out, I will still move those fine-rooted plants into the large pebbles just because I think it gives it a bit of a buffer in terms of having a bit more air and it's not constantly in a very, very damp situation. So that's what's happened, and it's worked in my experience, but it took a while. Very similar to the Philodendron burley Marx variegata, which I had mentioned on other videos. It takes a while to root out, and I think it needs to do that substantially before it starts pushing out new growth. But when it does bring out some really, really decent new growth. So coming into availability with this one, and it's an interesting one, and it was why I got it from Grow Tropicals. You might be able to hear some squeaking around. That is because this plant specifically is sitting, the pot is sitting on a chair, because that's the only way that I can do it and still have it in frame. But yeah, this isn't a plant that is, at least in my experience, isn't generally available very often. Have I seen it come onto the market a bit more, at least where I'm based in the UK, and I would imagine maybe Europe is the same? Yes, and by that I mean before it was nigh to impossible to find any of these anywhere. It was very, very difficult. They needed to do a lot of searching to do it. And I think it's because of that fuzzy petiole again. It's not something that everybody necessarily enjoys. So there isn't a huge demand for this plant. There is also some people, and I will say this in this availability section, a lot of people have kind of mentioned that there is a very similar plant, I think it's the philodendron, called the fuzzy petiole. Very similar vibes. I think there's another one, and if I can remember it, I will add it at the top there. Some people were saying, oh, this looks like it might be X. Are you sure it's a Serpens? As far as I can see, and based on the kind of websites and people's kind of learnings about which one is which, yes, I'm pretty sure this is a Serpens. Also, it is one of those things with companies like Ecuagenera, where they are potentially kind of starting these plants relatively young. And I'd like to think that they know what they're doing in terms of kind of the botanical names of most of the plants that they're selling, because it is their big field of expertise. I would tend to lean to trusting them and kind of saying, well, no, that is what it is, basically. Not always foolproof, but yeah. So yeah, it is one that doesn't come up very often. Still to this day, it does come up a bit more often these days. Probably a slightly more juvenile form of this plant. I would also imagine it's because, and I can only base this on my experience, it doesn't ship particularly well, basically. So there is going to be a time of rehabbing this plant when it gets to you, probably from wherever you're ordering, whether or not you're ordering it domestically or internationally. There's probably going to be some rehab that you need to do. Do I think it's worth it? Yes, for this plant. Do I think you might be able to find, because of the fuzzy petiole philodendron that I'm talking about, I'd seen in garden centers and a lot cheaper than I'd ever seen anything like a Serpens. If you want similar vibes and you're not that fussed about having the serpens and you're just happy with some fuzzy petioles and similar leaf shapes, maybe go for that. It will be cheaper overall because let's get on to price actually. I think when I got this, and I will hopefully find the price and add it at the very top there, it was kind of mid double digits towards low double digits. And that was coming in from Ecuagenera. I think when I bought it from Grow Tropicals, a much smaller plant, it was probably more expensive than the whole plant that I got from Ecuagenera, but that's understandable because they're like companies like Grow Tropicals are offering a service where they are getting these plants in potentially from I don't know where, but they are also massively rehabbing them in their own space, propagating them themselves. There's a lot of other things that they're doing, which understandably comes with a cost, basically. And it's also easier. You can get it. You're not going to have the issue of dealing with something like transport shock from an international order into your country. If it's just domestic, it tends to be a bit faster as well. So less stress for the plants. And do I think the price has come down drastically? No, I don't actually think the price has come down too much. I do remember there was a point where this plant was kind of close to the triple digits. It has come down, and I think it's not because of any other reason. It's because people have maybe moved on. They were aware of this for a while. I think this one had its big moment at some point many years ago where I think it was Kaylee Ellen really liked it. I think she's even said to this day that she still likes this plant. I understand why, because I like the fuzziness on plants. Generally, I've spoken about this in many of my videos, but the varicosum for me was underwhelming in that respect, and the redbacks didn't really do it for me too much. It is great. It's like a pet. But yeah, I get why the availability isn't there for this one, or why the price hasn't fluctuated too much. I kind of get it. Do I think that's going to change? Probably not. I don't see a lot more people being that interested in this plant. Again, as I said, there's the other kind of, I don't want to say dupes, but very similar plants like the fuzzy petiole, philodendron. Words are hard on a Sunday morning. But yeah, there is other options that people could potentially go with that might be an easier journey for them. Coming into pests. There's a few things I want to say about this plant when it comes to pests. So I will have to pick it up again for my sins, and hopefully you might be able to see the leaf that I want to show you right there, and hopefully it might come up with the issue. I'll see if I can bring it in a bit closer. Can you see some of the speckling that's happening on there? Spider mites love this plant, as well as, and let me see if I can bring it in because I just saw it a moment ago, and that's just one example there. They do exist on other areas. I don't know whether or not you might be able to see right there in the little kind of area there. There is a white fluffy bit. Yes. So mealybugs also like this, the same way, and I don't think I'm going to be able to show you on the petiole. I'll see if I can get a picture and insert it. If not, take my word for it. Very similar to the varicosum in my experience that I had with the varicosum. This is a plant that will kind of get mealybugs. Straighten it up on the chair. That will get mealybugs within the kind of fuzzy petioles that it gets. So that is a bit of an issue. Does it ever get ridiculous? No. But yeah, those are the two big pests that I think, based on my experiences with this plant, you really need to keep an eye out for this. So spider mites, and if you don't catch them early enough, you will see heavy speckling on the leaf, because much like the varicosum, the leaves are actually quite thin in relation to how thick the petioles are as well. So there is that. And I'm trying to see if there's any kind of blowing out. I don't know if you saw some crispiness or one of the older leaves that we had on there. It was getting a bit too much light, so I moved it somewhere that it gets slightly lower light. But yeah, it is definitely a pest magnet for both spider mites, especially in the summer, in the fronts and the backs of the leaves, and 100% for mealybugs. Very similar to the verrucosum, nowhere near as intense as I ever got on my verrucosum, but I think my verrucosum is the reason why I've got mealybugs in my entire collection now, because that was heavily infested when I bought it in here, and I should have just ditched it before I bought it in here. And then it proceeded to pass it on to everything else. So there is that. But if you stay on top of it, generally mealybugs aren't that bad. I have done another video on what I think would be the top 5 plants for mealybugs, and I will link it at the top there. But yeah, those are the 2 big ones that I would think you need to kind of keep an eye out for. There wasn't really ever any issue with thrips, and even whitefly that I occasionally get in here in the summer, that wasn't a problem basically. So coming into accessories and care for this plant, and again, I will lift it up. I said I wasn't going to lift it up. I always end up doing it anyway, but janky support sticks. So, and I will give you note of how big those leaves have gotten, and it has never had anything but janky support sticks. Yeah, you don't need a moss pole for this. It will size up even without a moss pole. Would it maybe done it a bit faster with a moss pole? Maybe, but I'm not that fast. These leaves are probably as large as I would like it to get. I think any larger than this, I wouldn't know where to put this plant. Do I think I'm going to try propagating this properly in the summer? Maybe, mainly because it's kind of hitting a bit of a ceiling. So I want to see if I can kind of get a bushier plant down below. Where I'm going to put all of this, I don't know. But that's a future memo problem in the summer. I ain't for right now. But yeah, so no moss pole. It has done very well for me in the semi-hydro mix. I will say, in my experience, this isn't one that you want to risk having a reservoir in for the winter, and I never did last winter or this winter. I've kind of more or less removed the reservoir. There's a tiny bit of water, but it's not a full reservoir. In the summer, however, it does need that reservoir, I find, because it can be a very, very thirsty plant. In terms of feed, I feed this the same way that I would any other plant in this collection, so kind of weekly, and I still use liquid gold leaf, and it's done really, really well. And I've not had any problems with that. But I mean, generally it's care. I've joked in the past about feral plants. This kind of is a bit of a feral plant at this stage. So as long as you can baby it enough to kind of get it to where it's happy, it will then just do its own thing. It doesn't need, as long as you keep an eye out for the pests and kind of catch it early enough. I've never had a massive infestation of spider mites, even when one of the leaves, I'd left it for a very long period of time and it was more or less decimated at that point. I specifically then removed that one leaf, treated it for spider mites, never had a real issue. Again, the speckling that you're seeing on that leaf that I showed you was from back then, but I left it on there and it was fine. It's more susceptible for both, specifically for spider mites, actually not for both, to spider mites when the leaf is emerging. When it's fully hardened off, it's less of an issue and you won't see as much of the speckling. Unfortunately, with the leaf that I showed you, they got to it when it was very, very fresh and very, very kind of soft. So unfortunately, the damage is quite visible. But other than that, relatively simple plant to care for. Ironically enough, I know I haven't made it sound like it was simple, but after the point where you get it and it's kind of rooted in happily and it's not really having any issues, and as long as you keep an eye out for the pests, accessories and care, not an awful lot. It's got a couple of janky support sticks, give it some support generally, and it will grow big, big, pillowy leaves for you, basically. Now, coming into final thoughts for this one. And let's start how I usually do with my final thoughts, which is knowing what I know now. And if I didn't have this plant, would I purchase this? 100%. Without a shadow of a doubt. I have not regretted owning this plant in any way or form. Am I happy I ordered a new one from Equigenera and didn't just go, oh, okay, the first one didn't survive, I'm not going to try again? 100%. Very happy that I tried again. Loved the leaf shape. I didn't realize it can size up to quite this level. It's kind of giving those pillowy leaves that you might get from the Philodendron Dean McDowell without it being acrylic, because I love My Philodendron Dean McDowell, I wanted it. It was on my wish list for years until I got it in my care. But I think coming into a realization of what I like and don't like these days, I cannot deal with crawlers. They can be quite easy at times. They generally aren't as fussy as climbers, I find, at least in my humble opinion. But my space isn't made for crawlers. I don't have all the space in the world for it to get that wide, that much, basically, because I need to be able to move around my space as well. So something like this that still gives you these huge, huge leaves without needing a moss pole is great in my experience, and it's similar vibes, really. Now, the elephant in the room, obviously, is the fact that you could get those other dupes. And if I had a bigger space, would I try them? 100%. I quite like the vibes and the kind of look that this plant gives. Really like those hairy petioles. I would love to know if any of you have got some of the dupes that I was mentioning, or the fuzzy petiole philodendron. How are you finding it? Is it a relatively easy plant? I think from what I heard from a couple of other people, everybody was just like, you should have got those. They're a lot easier to care for. I don't doubt it, but do let me know if you've had similar experiences down below in the comments. But yeah, in terms of a score, so a score out of 10, 10 being the best, 0 or 1 being the worst, where would I benchmark this? Probably a solid 6. And I will say why. It is, ironically enough, this is still one of my favorite plants. That should tell you something, and I'm giving it a 6. And it is mainly because the root tissue, basically, and there might be a higher propensity of rot. Based on my experiences, it might not be. It might have just, I was maybe unlucky. But yeah, the fact that you do need to keep an eye out for the pests, all of these things, I'm taking a good few points off. The reason why it's still getting a 6, and maybe I'd say a 6 or a 7, is because after those points, and as long as you can keep an eye, what I was talking about earlier, as long as you keep an eye out for the pests and it's rooted in fine, feral, it will do what it wants to do, and it will give you leaves like this with very little effort on your part, basically, at that stage. But it does have some time investment that you need to do in the beginning stages of owning this plant just to set yourself up for success. Yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say about this one. I'd be very curious if any of you watching this have got this plant or are interested in this plant. I'm fully expecting this video not to be one that is going to get an awful lot of views, and I will quantify that, because I can see every time I do review videos on some of my plants and maybe not that many people have heard of, there's not that many people that are searching for it on YouTube, so there's not that many people that will view it. But hopefully more people will view these videos when they're doing research about thinking about plants that they might want to buy. But yeah, I will leave you on a beautiful shot of this specific leaf here, and I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.